Well, not too long ago, I think it was about maybe a few days ago, and a friend of mine, which we'll call him Harrison, was working at a hotel. He was working at a hotel that was not far in California. Not gonna say what city he was in though, but Harrison loved doing his job. He has done his job, which is mainly as a security guard. Now, at the time of the story, this was during the pandemic, and ever since it happened a few days ago, I think it still kind of messed him up a bit. Harrison is 25 years old, and he worked at a hotel. It was a popular one in California, maybe at a town where he was at. He did night shifts mostly during the night, and most of the time it was quiet, and there's like nobody to break in except for people to come in and out of hotel rooms, checking in and out, etc. As Harrison was doing his shift one night, he came across something he did not really expect. There, on the second floor, he was working on the second floor, mainly making sure that everybody was staying in their rooms unless they were going out for any reason, and making sure nobody had ever 10 chances to break in the hotel room. As Harrison was doing his job, he all of a sudden heard what seemed to be somebody walking upstairs and entered the hallway. Harrison looked and thought maybe somebody was out there, but couldn't see who it was, thinking it might have been another customer. About a few minutes later, he saw a man that he's never seen before. He looked old, and he had greasy long hair, and he looked like he hadn't showered in days. Of course, this man looked homeless, and he looked like he was drunk, most likely because he'd been drinking alcohol so much. Harrison walked up to him and said, "Oh, hey, sir, are you in need of a room?" he asked. "No, I'm just looking for my friend," he said. "Do you know which room he lived on?" Of course, Harrison was confused. Why was this guy be looking for a guy named, well, his friend? "What's your friend's name?" Harrison asked. "Oh, my friend's name is Marcus. Do you know if he checked in the hotel?" he asked. Of course, Harrison was quite confused, but he didn't know if this guy was capable of doing. This guy was about maybe 5'4", and since Harrison was about 5'7", he could probably slightly take him on, even though he was big and strong, worked at the gym and stuff. He even worked at the military at one point. This man obviously didn't look like he'd been waiting for his friend. But it wasn't long until he ended up barging into the door when Harrison turned around. Of course, when Harrison looked over, he could see that the man who he talked to broken in the hotel room. He walked in the hotel room to find that there was nobody there, but of course, there was a broken window. Of course, the hotel room wasn't like a far drop down, but the old homeless man looked like he might have fell in the garbage in the dumpster and must have took off. The other security guards and the police were called to the hotel to investigate the room, but had found nothing. There was no trace of that man, and Harrison had no idea why was this man here, and why was he trying to get into that room. God only knows what he could have done if anyone was in that room. About maybe sometime in 2018, this happened to my friend's mother, which we'll call her Natalie. Natalie was about maybe in her 50s, and this obviously happened to her at least in 2018. Natalie was working the night shift as one of the other workers or nurses unfortunately couldn't make it due to them being busy or on vacation. So Natalie had to come in to do her night shift, which of course it happened to be on her night off, but she took that as an opportunity, which means she gets paid overtime. Natalie was in the hospital corridors, checking in on patients as a nurse and bringing them anything that they might need. Of course, visiting times were over, and Natalie was just walking down the halls, checking in on patients and making sure that they were doing okay. As Natalie was doing her job, she then felt a cold air and a cold breeze from behind her. Of course, this was during the summertime, so the hospital did have some air conditioning, but it felt unusually cold for some reason. Being on the third floor, Natalie looked around but couldn't find anybody. This is when she decided to look in one of the rooms. The patients were sleeping, or some of them were probably up, probably on their phones, laptops, or maybe they're doing something else, but couldn't see where the source of the cooled air was. It wasn't until a few moments later when Natalie looked over to see that there was a small child, maybe 7 years old. Natalie asked the girl where her parents were and why was she out of her room. She then laughed and ran off. Natalie was almost pissing herself. She honestly had no idea who this woman was, well, this little girl. So she ended up going to the front desk where one of the security guards were there. And the security guard went up with her to check out the third floor, but couldn't find any trace of the young girl. The only explanation Natalie could get was either maybe the girl was maybe not really there, or maybe if she was there, she might have ran away. Of course, they searched the whole third floor, but couldn't find any source of the young girl. All Natalie could probably hear was it was probably paranormal. Whenever she worked there and she looked around, at nighttime especially, she had no idea where that girl was or why was the girl there. She had no idea if this was paranormal or if it was her mind playing tricks on her. Natalie still gets shooken up whenever she thinks of this story, and still to this day, she's quite shooken up about it. This happened to my dad sometime in 2012, and obviously my dad still questions himself about this when he looks at this. My dad used to be a tow truck driver. He began sometime in 2008, and he'd been a tow truck driver all the way up till the end of 2016. Now, my dad worked as a tow truck driver, mainly did calls. Most of the times he did overnight shifts, which caused him to get up very early in the morning. Some calls he get were around 2 a.m. to around 3, others maybe around 4 or 5 in the morning. Most times he didn't get home from work till maybe later on, and then he would get some sleep, which explains why my dad gets crabby at night. Of course, my dad had to be woken up at 3 in the morning due to a call. So, a call that he got in the morning was probably around maybe 2. My dad woke up at his phone ringing, and he picked up to answer it. It happened to be a woman. Maybe she was in her mid-40s, and she said, hello there. Are you this user? Yeah, said my dad, replying to the girl. I am. What's up? Well, as you could see, my car went into a ditch as I was driving, and can you be able to help me tow it out? Okay, I'm on my way. As soon as my dad replied to the woman's question, he got up and got dressed, had to use the bathroom before he left, and then grabbed his keys, locked the front door of our house, and jumped into his tow truck. He drove what seemed to be maybe a half an hour from his house, and when he was driving, he appeared to be what seemed to be in a deserted road. He had no idea where this road was, but it obviously was a road that he was unfamiliar with. He was looking for the car that the woman described. It happened to be what seemed to be a Chevrolet. But with that, my dad looked around but couldn't find the Chevrolet. He looked around but still couldn't find any. It wasn't long until he found out that there was a car in a ditch, and it was the exact same car. My dad walked over but couldn't see anyone and called out for the woman if she was there. But unfortunately he couldn't see her, and as he looked over he couldn't find her. He called out if she was there, but of course he couldn't find her. Just as he was about to get back into the van, a woman came out screaming as if she were attacked. My dad had freaked out almost and asked her what was the matter and if something was wrong. She began crying and said that there was a man who tried to kidnap her. My dad looked to see that there was a man, and he looked like he'd been holding a gun. My dad immediately almost froze, and he was worried, thinking that this guy might even shoot him or maybe shoot the girl. He had no idea as to who he was and why he was there. "What are you doing here?" my dad said, calling the man out as he put his gun down. "Oh, I wanted to kill my ex-girlfriend. She refused to be my wife again. We had a divorce a year ago, and I wanted to get back with her. But unfortunately, with that being said, she decided to reject that. My dad immediately told him that he needed to get away or he would call the cops. This man seemed to be unfazed, tried to attack the woman, but my dad got in between the woman and the man, result of him getting things stabbed and scratched in the arm with a knife. My dad screamed in pain as the guy I took off running. Of course, my dad couldn't catch him as he ran too fast, but he helped the woman get her car out of the ditch, and then he drove back home. He didn't get any more calls for the rest of the night, but I asked him why he was up so late, as I heard him leave when I was getting my glass of water. My dad told me this about a few years later, and he said that the man had attacked him with a knife, but he was threatening him with a gunpoint. It obviously really made me nervous, thinking my dad could have been killed that night if he did not even try to fight back the woman. Apparently it was her ex-boyfriend, basically wanting nothing to do with her and wanting to get what's coming to her. My dad still gets chills to this day when he thinks of this story, but I'm just hoping that man got caught, and I hope he gets what he deserves. This obviously happened to a good friend of mine, which we'll call him Barry at the sake of this story. Barry was about maybe in his 30s, sometime around 2011. It still messes him up when he thinks about this story. Now, he used to work as a security guard in a garage, which was not in a condo where my Nana lived. Now, Barry used to work there from around 2008 to 2018, as he had worked there as a security guard to make part-time job to help his wife and kids. Now, he was expecting a 5th child on the way, so his main job and his wife's main job weren't not enough to support a 5th kid. So at that, Barry had to get what seemed to be a part-time job. He worked mostly night shifts as a security guard, but of course it made him easier hours so he can be with his wife and kids at the times, and even times where he can do his main work. He mainly worked as an engineer, which they make pretty decent amount of money, but he also has some experience with being security guards. He has been a security guard during his college year as a night shift and had no problems. But this honestly really messes him up. When he was working as a security guard in the garage, in where my dad, mom, Nana's condo is, he basically his job was to make sure there was nobody sneaking around to try to enter the condo that way. As Barry was doing his usual thing, he obviously heard footsteps coming from down the garage. Obviously there shouldn't be anyone down here except for the other security guard. The other security guard was on the other side of the garage, so of course he was the only one on one side. He looked over to see that there was a man. He obviously did not know why this man was there, but this man looked to be maybe in his 60s, and he looked as if he was waiting for the bus. Of course, with that said, Barry just went over to him, but of course the man just walked away. Obviously, he didn't want to be bothered. Barry just let it go and does his own business. Then, out of nowhere, Barry unfortunately got something up his sleeve, and then he turned to see the man, and he was running away. He screamed as he ran, as if he was in a panic. Barry obviously was confused. Why was this man running away from something? He looked over, and he could see that there was a shadowy figure. The shadowy figure stood about maybe 15 feet away from the door that leads to the office where the security guards are. The figure obviously just stared at Barry. Barry had no idea why this figure was there, but it looked so freaky he couldn't even speak. He ended up alerting the other security guard, which he came from the other side of the office, the garage, to the side Barry was at. But by the time he got there, the shadowy figure was gone, and of course Barry did his explanation on his part of what the figure looked like and why was that man even scared. It turned out that the man was actually someone that he knew working at the same job, but he was on his break, So he didn't resemble anything of a security guard. He probably just took that vest off just some air. Of course, he was a new guy, but he reacted too quickly. He quitted his job that day as he had saw something that he didn't expect to see. Barry had unfortunately quit his job as a security guard at least 2 weeks' notice and worked at another store. But of course, he never did really too much night shifts again after this experience, and he wonders to this day why was that shadowy figure there and what was it? That still questions Barry every time he thinks about this story.